Welcome to the webinar, Transitioning to an AI-Enabled Procurement Process. Today's webinar is going to be taped and it will be available on YouTube, and we hope that you will be able to share it with your colleagues and other industry affiliates. On this webinar, we have a panel, and Richard, if you can go to the next slide. The panel is a really great panel with diverse experience. My name is Laura Ciceri. I'm the founder of Supply Chain Insights, and we're joined today by Jasmine Castro, Carol Denninger, and Richard Barnett. Jasmine, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm Jasmine Castro, and I'm a global sourcing and commodity manager for Polycom. I'm responsible for driving the implementation and adoption of the LevaData platform amongst our global sourcing team, and also responsible for the management of our all standard electronic components.
Great, and your phone is just doing awesome there. Carol, how about yourself? Can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, my name is Carol Denninger, and I've been with Bose Corporation for well, let's say more than 25 years, my whole life practically. I'm a supply chain solutions manager at Bose, and I work in our operations group in supply chain. And with that, I'm responsible for implementation of LevaData, along with other management of costing processes at Bose.
Awesome. Thank you for joining, Carol and Jasmine. And Richard, you are working for LevaData. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Excited to be here and sharing the conversation today, Laura. Always appreciated the work you've been focused on in terms of driving thought leadership and innovation, particularly in this area today of direct material sourcing and procurement. I'm responsible for marketing and customer success at LevaData, so work closely with each of our customers through their customer journeys, and very excited to hear the story of Polycom and Bose as shared by Jasmine and Carol today.
Well, as is the group, we've got a big group on today. You know, cognitive computing is really very, very interesting to a lot of people. So what we're going to do today is we're going to set the stage of what is artificial intelligence, what is cognitive, what is the digital supply chain. I'll do a few warm-up slides, and then Richard, I'm going to hand it over to you to talk about a recent study that you've been working on, the background of the opportunity in cognitive sourcing. So as an analyst in the space, as I look at digital transformation, I have never been more excited about just the wealth of great technologies that are evolving in the market. You know, I'm looking at the confluence of blockchain, streaming data, 3D printing, robotics, wearables, mobility, open source analytics, cognitive computing, and all of this leads to the autonomous supply chain. Now, a mistake that I see people making is looking at the digital supply chain, not really driving digital transformation. And the digital supply chain is really where we put today's processes on steroids, and we make them faster and we make them more nervous. But what I want to encourage people to do is to step back and to think about the core philosophies behind the decision support tools that we run today. They were basically built to be inside out, to look at the enterprise, not as a value network. And as you'll see in the work that we're going to share today, we've never had greater commodity volatility, and we've also never had as much of an issue with supplier viability. Secondly, the applications that we developed in the 1990s were very much about functional excellence. It was about sourcing for sourcing's sake. It was about supply chain planning and manufacturing in that function of supply chain planning. But really, if we're going to orchestrate not just volume, but also value and look at margin and price, we've got to be able to orchestrate cross-functionally. And this digital transformation gives us the opportunity to do that. And so the mistake I see many companies making is looking at digitization versus digital transformation. And I define the digital transformation as really stepping back and thinking about how do we transform the atoms, so 3D printing, paperless, and the electrons, AI, cognitive computing, to be able to drive new supply chain capabilities, to think differently and drive different outcomes. Richard, if you want to go to the next slide. Every year we do an analytics study and we look at how disruptive are the technologies that we're looking at today. It doesn't mean that one technology has greater value than another. We're really looking at disruption, the ability to really redefine things differently. And when we look at the recent analytics study, we find that blockchain, cognitive computing, software robots, and drones are seen as very disruptive, and data visualization, Internet of Things are seen as promising, but not as disruptive when we think about 5 years. So as you think about the data that Richard's going to share and the case studies that we're going to have from our two panelists, I want you to think not about your supply chain and your sourcing processes as they exist today. Instead, I want you to step back and I want you to think about what they could be. And so, Richard, with that, what I'd like to do is pass it over to you and let's do the transition to the research study.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Laura. One of the I'll highlight here is your work that you've done around the evolution of insights, and I think this builds right into the work that we are finding around where the market is evolving around leveraging new forms of advanced analytics and cognitive computing within the direct material sourcing space. So this evolution from descriptive and maybe predictive analytics into prescriptive and then cognitive, where there's a form of intelligence and they're getting smarter over time, is really kind of the core evolution that we see in the market as well. And it's where we've made a lot of focus around innovation, around building from new sources of analytics to convert those insights into decisions and recommendations. So it's a little bit of a backdrop. Last year, we did a cognitive sourcing survey that was very well represented across different industries. Participants represented over $450 billion in annual direct material spend, and we did target specifically automotive, life sciences, high tech, and then consumer products. What we found is that there's three major dimensions of differentiation between best-in-class performers and average performers, and that gap is widening very quickly. But the three dimensions are really around how companies are leveraging sources of insight. To Laura's point earlier, this kind of flipping around from being enterprise out-oriented to market or network in thinking is really shifted around where are the new sources of insight that are leveraging, that you can leverage for improved decision making. Strategic control is a second key dimension, which is different dimensions of this, but primarily around how lean teams today can scale across the total profile of spend that they're managing, including notoriously the tail spend elements that are hard to scale across. And then the third element is agility. So it's looking at how fast and how efficient companies are around moving from maybe an early insight around a market trend or condition, and then taking action and engaging with their supplier partners, manufacturing partners, to quickly address and lock in either risk mitigation or locking in those new opportunities. And all this is built around a LevaData platform, and I'll share this as a background for the insights that we'll draw from this study as we go through the conversation today with Carol and Jasmine. But if you look at this, gives an idea of an example of a cognitive computing-based platform in use today. So on the left-hand side, as we talked about from an advanced analytics perspective, there's these important elements or segmentation of sources of insight. So many companies really start at the bottom left around focusing on their enterprise information. Oftentimes that's fragmented and hard to get accessed and aggregated in a consistent way, because the information's coming from spend history, transaction history from ERP systems, product management systems providing different bills of material, both at the design as well as in manufacturing, maybe internal forecast and demand information. So just focusing on getting that well managed is difficult enough, but really to gain sort of, from a cognitive perspective, it's really to balance that with new sources of insight coming from the network, which is information provided by suppliers, distributors, manufacturing partners, from the market, so different forms of market intelligence, whether that's indices and information at a sub-commodity level, or other forms of raw material and foreign exchange, other contextual drivers of shift of risks and opportunities in the context of their spend profile. And the third element here is community. So how do you aggregate, anonymize, and understand what's happening in our case, within the LevaData customer community around those key subcommodity areas or key verticals, like in consumer electronics versus in other industrial verticals, for example. And all this is put into a shared platform of learning where you have multiple AI methods, but they're embedded in the context of what's the right algorithm or approach to drive for the right insight or recommendations back to the key users. And so we'll talk through this in a little more detail, but really the focus for LevaData has been to build out these capabilities, purpose-built initially for the direct material sourcing professionals, commodity managers, and then extend that into their partners within the organization. So that could be engineering, manufacturing, and finance over time. So that's a little bit of background. So what I'd like to do, Laura, is pass it back to you, and you can kind of help us through this conversation, some of these key question topics.
Yeah, so let's do a panel discussion right now. What triggered the exploration of cognitive sourcing and the problems you hope to resolve? Because a lot of times people will call me and they say, you know, how do I take the plunge, and is cognitive even real? You know, Richard, you know, what was your challenge, and why did you go from more of a position in supply chain planning to look at cognitive sourcing?
Well, you know, a few areas. I mean, one key dimension is that generally innovation in the direct materials space has been falling behind other peers, other functions within supply chain. And you can look at that even more broadly across other core functions within the enterprise around digital transformation. But specifically in supply chain, there's been a lot of innovation and focus around demand sensing capabilities, around new algorithms for supply chain planning, you know, and a lot of automation and execution focus. So when it comes to procurement, there's been, in my opinion, personal opinion, an overemphasis on procure-to-pay automation activities, et cetera, which has value. But if you think about managing the risk and opportunities associated with the full COGS, the full, you know, spend that for an OEM or for a manufacturer directly impacts margin, profitability, and competitive advantage for the company, I think there's a misalignment between where innovation focus and dollars have gone. And so our real mission has been to really focus in that area, drive innovation where we can, and partner with our customers to explore how can we transform a process and a practice area that really hasn't fundamentally changed, you know, in 15 to 20 years. And so we see a big disruption, a big change happening. We're trying to lead that, but it's not really about us as much as the community overall, shifting focus and thinking and having, you know, executive leadership and a mindset for looking at what's the art of the possible. And that's really what we're trying to nurture and explore.
Well, let's hear from Jasmine now. You know, Jasmine, I know Polycom is growing. Why did you look at cognitive computing when only 7% of companies are considering it?
Yeah, well, first of all, I feel really fortunate to work for a company that was willing to invest in this technology and see how we can benefit from it. For Polycom, we have a large brand, but we're actually, a lot of people are surprised that we're a small company in terms of employees. And the global sourcing group is, you know, pretty small in itself, and actually shrinking, even though the company is growing. You know, so we have this projected growth, but our team is getting smaller, and we really needed a way to be able to manage the additional assignments that all of the you know, members of the team had, you know, been absorbing as, you know, the team's getting smaller, but we're, you know, growing. But also we really what it came down to is how can we continue to do better, not just to maintain, you know, what we had been doing, but how can we have further reach into some of the commodities that even when we had a full larger team, never really had the time to go after. So that could be, you know, nuts and bolts hardware, all the penny parts that, you know, caps and resistors. We really needed a platform that could help us go after these corners where we previously had been really allowing the contract manufacturers to just kind of take over, since we just never had the time or the bandwidth to go after it. So that's what really brought us to LevaData, and you know, we're still working on trying to you know, improve and get to other categories over time. And
Jasmine, how long have you been doing this with?
Good question. So we've we've been a customer of LevaData and using this platform for 3 years. I'm just realizing right now. So we've been using it for 3 years, and still experiencing some challenges, which we'll go into.
Yeah.
And that's why I asked, because you were very early on the curve. Let's switch to Carol. Now, Carol, you work for Bose, and thank you for bringing all of our great audio gear to market. Tell us your story. Why did you look to LevaData to help you in sourcing?
Well, I'd like to first of all echo what Jasmine said. I'm thankful that I have a management team that really sees the future of digital procurement and is willing for us to go out and explore solutions such as LevaData. But what really brought us to LevaData was just a really strong need. We had made a manufacturing strategy change, and I think it was September of 2016, where Bose actually sold off 2 of our large manufacturing facilities, and they were purchased by our external supply chain partner, and thus we began the journey of shifting to a primarily outsourced model. We still had one factory where we did about 20% of our manufacturing, but 80% of our manufacturing was now being done by these external supply chain partners. That really brought a challenge for us because we suddenly lost visibility to all of our spend. The Tier 2 spend disappeared. It became part of our supply chain partners' spend. And we realized that in order to do commodity management, which we continued to, we plan to continue doing, we had done a lot of benchmarking before making this transition. And, all the best in class said, make sure you maintain your commodity management. You will get the best prices if you guys are doing the negotiating and actually managing the suppliers' relationships, et cetera. So we needed a way to be able to do that, a way to be able to aggregate our spend, both internal spend, as I mentioned, we were still doing our own manufacturing, and also all of this 80% that was now outsourced with our external supply chain partners. So we had a challenge to get visibility, and we did a lot of looking, a lot of solutions, and turned out that LevaData was where we landed. So LevaData, they give us that ability to aggregate internal and external spend. Obviously, we got a lot more with LevaData than just the aggregation of the spend and the ability to see the forecast of the Tier 2 suppliers. But really, that was the drive that made us pull the trigger.
And Carol, how long have you been working on this journey?
So we started with LevaData in September of 2016. So right about the time that we made that model change, we began working with LevaData. So it's been 18 months. Okay.
Well, let's continue on now and talk a little bit more about the journey for cognitive computing. So, Richard, I think you've got a few more slides to share with us to talk a little bit about strategic control.
Absolutely. So one of the study highlights that was really illuminating last year is that average performers, average organizations, are only engaging in a competitive bid with 52% of their supply base annually. And for practitioners, that's not fully surprising if you think about the Pareto distribution of the tail spend number of suppliers versus the actual amount of spend. But this average has not changed. If anything, it's gotten maybe a little bit worse in certain key verticals over time that we've seen. And the difference here is that best-in-class organizations are scaling across 90% of their total spend, and they're continuously sourcing instead of in a kind of a static sourcing event-driven kind of process. And one of the things that's really quite interesting is this gap between, moving through an ad hoc or quarterly sourcing event that may be focused just around a few key sub-commodity groups and suppliers that still only represent 25, 30% of their total supply base overall, versus moving to a model where companies that leverage more of a cognitive sourcing model and mentality, they want to take action when they need to in the market. So they still might have those anchor sourcing events as a way to just kind of manage, the process and engagement with their supply base on a periodic basis. But this idea of seeing, volatility shifts in capacitors and resistors, as Jasmine was talking about earlier, stuff that normally wouldn't have been actively managed and strategically managed anyway, but you're seeing high degrees of price volatility, of capacity constraints, shifts in allocation of supply. all over the place now, all across the spend. So that ability to sort of detect that shift, act faster than anyone else in their market or their vertical and their peers, and then engage with those suppliers and reduce that cycle time is the agility dimension that we're seeing as well, be a massive, significant differentiator. We're seeing, on average, based on the survey, average performance is around 15 days to prepare for a negotiation event, and then maybe something on the order of 15 to 20 days to actually complete that negotiation process. Oftentimes, because the information to support the justification or the context around how to hit a target price or how to look at a volume-based bid process and negotiation is taking a long time with a lot of manual effort, whereas best-in-class companies are able to close out these cycles in 2 to 3 days. So a relatively small percentage of the survey market was able to be in best-in-class, but this is we believe this is illustrative of the capability gap that will emerge as companies continue to adopt cognitive sourcing strategies. It's not just about technology, it's also about a process change and kind of a mindset change around how you shift to a more of a continuous sourcing paradigm, and then have the supporting sources of insight and capabilities to automate and then scale very lean teams to act in this manner.
Well, thank you, Richard. Jasmine and Carol, I'd love to get your perspective here on sensing risks and opportunity and how LevaData has improved agility. Jasmine, your thoughts around, what agility means for you with this increased volatility?
Right. Well, it definitely has been a pretty wild ride over the past year. For me, it's what I was explaining earlier is it started out as how can we get more cost reductions? How can we react quicker in our RFQ cycles, and all to reduce cost. Now at this point where I'm at with where we are with some of these surprise commodities that normally we would not have spent as much time on, like such as MLCCs or resistors or FETs. Now it's more about being able to report exactly what that impact is, what it's going to be over the next year, and what we can expect over even the next 18 months, and to get that information out to our executives and also the product managers and other groups to let them know, almost put out a warning. That's what I feel like I have been doing over the past couple of quarters, to let them know what's coming and what to expect in terms of cost increases as well as lead times. So getting all of this information in the system or in this platform has been very helpful, at least as a way of quickly pinpointing the percentage increases that we're seeing and being able to report by business unit and by quarter, and then even 18 months out, this is what it's going to look like. That has been invaluable. And even though we have an executive team that doesn't always know what we're doing, and with this platform in particular, they definitely noticed how quick we were able to get them information and respond.
Well, and Richard's got a slide up that's the Supply Chain Insights research slide, and what we're doing here is highlighting in a different industry just the degree of commodity volatility. And the evolution of source, make, and deliver decision support applications were based on an assumption that we were not going to have high volatility, and we've really been looking more at volume versus value and margin, and the ability to orchestrate market to market and to be able to have visibility of the impact of this volatility is, I think, one of the major benefits of LevaData. Carol, what is your thought?
Yeah, well, we've also had a challenge at Bose where we were, especially in the procurement group, where we always wanted to be the experts. We wanted to be able to go forward to our executives and tell them, or the engineers, whoever it is, and let them know the impact of any of these raw material shifts. Whether it's the raw material or it's the currency or any of these trends that are going on, we want to be the experts that can bring those things to them versus them coming to us and saying, "Hey, I saw an article. What do you think of this?" We want to go proactively to them and say, "This is what's going on in the market, and we recommend this." So that's always been a challenge, and it's always been a desire of the procurement group. And when we first started looking into LevaData, and again, I mentioned that the challenge originally to look at LevaData had more to do with visibility, but what we realized is we were also going to be given a tool that was going to allow us to also bring forward these commodity trends, market data, to say, how is this going to impact Bose spend? Exactly when raw materials are going up X amount, what does that mean to Bose? So LevaData has given us that ability. It's giving us that tool. It's a place that we can go, again, not just to aggregate spend and to turn RFQs quicker, et cetera, but also to be the in-house experts on how trends in the marketplace, commodity pressures, et cetera, are impacting Bose specifically. So, and again, Jasmine mentioned the challenges that have been going on lately, and we've been affected by that as well. We've had suppliers go out of business, and we've had to quickly make changes, and we've had to be able to react very quickly and be a little more proactive in being prepared to react. And having more visibility is really been a key to that. Having the visibility and having the tools where we can grab the data and make quick decisions versus, spending time trying to collect the data and analyze. Having these analytics and data kind of at our fingertips is something that's really going to make us more valuable and really, moving towards that best in class where we are the experts.
Richard, you've got a slide here on tail spend. I want to ask Carol a question about tail spend. Carol, sometimes people say, well, it's all about 80-20. If I manage, 80% of my suppliers, then, I'm good. What do you think about the tail spend, the suppliers that supply, probably lower volume or maybe less impact? How important is it, and what's the impact of LevaData to manage the tail spend?
Well, I think that the slide says it all. The average organizations are doing pretty good going after those top suppliers. But there is a lot of money and a lot of opportunity, both opportunity and funds, but also just risk that's out there for that tail spend. And we definitely have seen that going after the tail spend is really where you get that extra goodness. There's a lot of, most people that are out there negotiating think if they can get at their top spend, they're doing okay. But really the extra sauce, I guess, is being able to go after that last 20%, which usually is a lot of suppliers. It's an awful lot of suppliers. So it's important that you have tools to allow you to do that. We used to forgo that pretty regularly because it just wasn't practical. By the time we finished with the top suppliers, it was time to start back up again with them, because really the time it took to get the data together and feel like we had a package that was reasonable to send out for quoting, we really didn't even have a minute to look at the other guys. But those are the suppliers that can cause you just as much trouble. There's not only is there opportunity out there, but there's a lot of risk out there. So really, if you're able to chase after, additional spend like that, it's really where you see the value out of a tool like LevaData.
And how specifically does LevaData help you? Is it just speed and time and visibility, or is it the cognitive piece? How does LevaData help with this tail spend?
Well, for now, I would say, the quick answer to that is the speed and time of volatility. Obviously, if you're able to turn an RFQ and aggregate your data quicker, you can just send out more. So we haven't gotten to the point where we're perfect at it. We're just really just getting into it. But the ability to have the data on one tool is really where we're seeing the biggest benefit. Back in the old regime, the pre-LevaData days, everybody's tool was a little different, mostly Excel spreadsheets on people's desktops, but they spent a lot of time manipulating that data and going after it and trying to fetch it. And where's the new product spend, and where's the spend that's at the JDM where we don't even have a bill of material, for example. So really just kind of ferreting out all that various spend. But when we have it in one tool, we can just very quickly pull up what is the spend from, XYZ supplier, or even, I should say, even you can pull up the spend for a particular commodity area, and you can see that it's with 7 suppliers, and you can quickly parse out which suppliers you want to send a quote to, and hitting a button, and off it goes. And then you're able to spend the time doing other work. So there's a very big add just in being able to aggregate that quicker and get it out quicker. We haven't gotten into using all of the other features, which there's a lot of benefits with LevaData that we're really just starting to touch on now, and there's going to be a lot more benefits, I believe, where we're able to see the different levers associated with the more tagging we do of raw materials. For example, we will be able to quickly see the impact of the raw material shifts up or down. Where we see opportunities, we can quickly go out and attack that. A lot of other areas where we feel that we're going to be able to get all the feeds that are coming in through LevaData's cognitive sourcing and just teeing up the different opportunities, whereas before we were, just stumbling across them, I would say. LevaData is going to allow us to be much more planful in the way we go after our supplier spend and much less reactive. So we're really excited about this next quarter, where we're really starting to kick off a whole nother module of LevaData usage, and it's exciting for us.
Well, thank you, Carol. Richard, one of the things that I've been talking to clients this week is, oil prices are going up, and we've got a lot of supply issues and high tech. Why don't you talk a little bit about how LevaData helps with that and share some insights from your cognitive study?
Absolutely. So, part of what we're seeing around the market across multiple industry verticals, but particularly the ones that we're focused on, is just this increased volatility is the new normal. And that source of risk is oftentimes layered and networked, meaning that we're seeing disruptions that are highly unexpected coming from now economic trade policy changes and shifts. We're seeing interesting cross-industry vertical shifts where, for example, component suppliers are shifting allocations of supply from consumer electronics into automotive because they like the reliability requirements, the margin, lifetime, kind of product life cycle sort of profitability. And those are creating these sort of broad implications at both that you can see those and sense where those shifts are occurring. Sometimes from a sub-commodity perspective, sometimes it's coming, directly from just a key supplier making specific moves, and then, sensing that across the network of customers as well is a really unique source of insight. So it's all about looking at not the execution horizon around continuity of supply, where there's been a lot of focus around a late shipment may lead to, a low inventory point at a VMI location and bound to my contract manufacturer. There's a lot of eyes on that execution horizon, but the degree of freedom to actually respond and resolve that issue is very limited. So we think that the opportunity is to kind of move to a much broader sensing capability that's in that operational to strategic horizon, where you're seeing, capacity lead times, lead times for key sub-commodities shift, across different weeks. You're seeing, price or, other volatility measures that are highly correlated to other like parts. And then this kind of contextual information of seeing like the impact of foreign exchange, raw material cost changes, where you may not have the exact material composition for every part, but generally what that is at the sub-commodity level, and then you can find new correlations and have a better predictive view of what's actually going to be potentially at risk over the next 2 to 3 quarters. Whereas today, I think something that Jasmine and Carol point out is that simply the translation of just wherever that source of information today might be on a separate third-party market report or an email even, translating that into what is the context or the impact of my spend and my projected spend based on new product introductions, et cetera, over the next 2 to 3, 4 quarters. That's critically important to own that sensing capability functionally, and then be that trusted advisor to all the executive peers, cross-functional groups that you're working closely with, like in engineering, and really kind of proactively maybe guide or orchestrate what is our overall point of view and strategy and response. So LevaData is really focused on taking a lot of, cognitive or AI-based methods, but embedded in the platform. So we're not asking people to be experts in data science per se. It's all in the purpose of being enabling those sourcing professionals to have new insights. So we've really talked about, a lot of our customers started with that 360-degree visibility, getting visibility across outsourced contract manufacturing partners, thinking about how do you have kind of sustainable cost management over time, shifting that lead time and the analysis time down so they can be more proactive. And really the evolution has been into identifying risks and opportunities that are actionable and then making recommendations around what actions to take, whether those are specific negotiation levers to use in a specific sourcing event with suppliers, or it's maybe recommendations in general around how to think about risk avoidance and locking in available or limited capacity early. And then going from that recommendation to action online. So we have an RFQ process that manages the normal RFQ lifecycle. And the reason why we developed that on the platform is not to just have another RFQ system, but is to embed the intelligence and the recommendations automatically that's coming from both the sourcing professionals as well as from Leva and the LevaData platform in line, so that in a few key moves, key negotiation levers can be embedded in the RFQ and the ask and the communication back to the suppliers. And that's what really drives scalability across that tail spend over time. So that's kind of the pattern of how we see companies leveraging some of these cognitive capabilities. A lot of that's advanced analytics. It's synthesizing and translating information that's relevant, and then going from that to recommendations on actions to take, and then scaling that across the network very quickly. That's the pattern.
Well, great. Carol, why don't you talk a little bit about moving from reacting to orchestrating with LevaData and what that's meant to you?
Well, I guess I'd start with I sort of touched on this before, but, at Bose, we were doing 20% of our business externally and 80% internally. Back in those days, it was easy to get our information and, put together a package. 20% we didn't worry about too much. We were able to get the high spend devices and patch them into our RFQ. But once we made the shift, suddenly, we couldn't do it the old-fashioned way. Well, we still have people that like the old way. They're still holding on to it. But what we found really is that as we have the data available, and as we have the tools available with some of the data that Richard was talking about, being able to see some of the levers, some of the spend levers that are out there, whether it be a risk or an opportunity, we can very quickly take the data that is now in the system, in the database here in LevaData, along with some of the recommendations that were being given, and we're very quickly able to make informed decisions without having to synthesize the data ourselves. So we had many sources of data. We still are making some of those transitions, but we have many sources of data that we were subscribing to. Each commodity lead was doing it their own way. They each had their own sort of subscriptions. They each had their own Excel spreadsheets. They each had their own, publications that they were reading. And everybody, some people looked at it monthly, some people looked at it quarterly, some people didn't look at it at all because they really couldn't put it all together. But now where we're giving them a tool which is giving them the data that they need, we are finding that they come out looking much smarter, honestly. They aren't just reacting to articles that are showing up in front of them, but they're proactively seeing where those trends might be going. And really, the more they trust and use LevaData, the more they're able to. We're really just making them look good, quite honestly. They're getting more confidence in their ability to make sort of those predictive decisions and to actually be able to make recommendations. Whereas before, it was a little bit more about bringing information forward after they've, spent time aggregating it, bringing information forward and looking for what the recommendations might be. But now they're really able to just come forward and say, this is what we think we should do. So LevaData has allowed our commodity leads, or is allowing, I should say, we're still in that mode of adapting, but is allowing our commodity leaders to really be the experts and be out there quickly making those decisions and making those recommendations. Whereas before they were in the back seat, responding and reacting to things that were being thrown at them.
Jasmine, how about yourself? What's your story here?
Yeah, well, I have to agree with Carol. We're all looking a little bit better using the platform, or at least just being able to pull information quickly and share with the team. Yeah, I feel the same. I had mentioned a couple of cases to the team where I use LevaData to get at information quicker. This might be a okay time to mention my MLCC dilemma, where we realize that there's that supply is tightening, prices are increasing, but also that there's a group of this category that are more impacted, the larger case sizes. So immediately when we're getting wind of that some of the top manufacturers in the MLCC category are going to either accelerate the end of life or at least change their life cycle to not recommended for new design for case sizes, say 6x3 and up. I immediately wanted to look at what our exposure might be. So it's no longer now that I need to look at this category that maybe we didn't review as often in such high frequency as we are. Mm-hmm. Now it used to be kind of like an annual check-in or maybe even semi-annual. Now then it went down to monthly, and even weekly we're seeing changes. So just an idea that I had is to throw in a subcategory to look at case sizes to get an idea of how much spend and how much usage we have and what the demand looks like for these these larger case sizes. So I'm actually in the middle of doing this now and getting that reporting out. But it's just one example, and the reason why I brought it up is that this is 3 years in, we're still constantly looking at ways to leverage this platform and this data, this data that now we realize comes to us so quickly, that used to take hours and sometimes days to pull to complete tasks. Now it's kind of like more. What else can we do? How much more can I leverage this platform? And so this is just one example that it's really, as you continue to use it, you're going to find yourself searching for other ways to get at information quicker. And again, I believe that our team really appreciates the information that we're able to get to them so quickly.
Well, and I'm sure they do. I mean, Jasmine and Carol, when you think about quicker, is it weeks to days or days to hours? How much quicker is it to get answers?
Yeah, if I could say, I would say days to maybe even minutes, right? Since I'm uploading, we are at least uploading once a quarter, and maybe we'll get to a point where I can refresh more frequently as forecasts and demand changes. But right now it's once a quarter, and previously, if I had a project, a big supplier coming in, or some fire that we're trying to put out, such as this MLCC situation, I would spend a couple of days pulling that information together, wrangling it all into some format that everybody can digest, and now it's available to me, and I can easily extract it and manipulate. So I would say just even from days to hours in my case.
Carol, any thoughts there? Because time's money. Our ability to be agile and deal with variability is really all about time, right?
Yep, for sure. We're not quite as mature, I would say, as Jasmine is at this point, but it was taking us probably more than days. Now, it depends on what information we were trying to look at, but a lot of times we were actually going out and asking our external supply chain partners to help us get some of the data because we didn't have it available at all. And then we were able to get our internal data very quickly, but in order to really get all the data together, and it depended how accurate we wanted it to be, but it was, I would say we were more like weeks even, or week at least, definitely more than days. And now we are able to pull that information together. And again, it depends on exactly what we're looking for, but we're able to pull it together in probably maybe hours. So going from maybe a week down to a couple hours to be able to get the data together. So definitely big improvement in, just the expediency of being able to collect the data for sure.
Well, we've talked about cognitive sourcing and 4 value propositions: improve visibility, particularly with contract manufacturing, the ability to do more with less. And, every procurement organization that I talk to is, really under the gun for, outsourcing or contract manufacturing or, new product launch. This whole issue with increased volatility, supplier viability, and then the ability to shift from reacting to orchestrating. However, this doesn't come without, embracing some challenges. So I think, Richard, let's kind of shift gears, and I look forward to getting questions in this area, because sometimes people say, I can't really go to cognitive because I don't have good data, right? Data accuracy, dirty data. And I laugh because, cognitive really helps with dirty data, but yet so few people are willing to take the challenge. Richard, what are your thoughts here about, the challenge around data accuracy, and as you think about LevaData?
Yeah, I think it's a great something that's great to highlight, because so many of our customers or prospective customers, when we first start engaging with them, absolutely the most common sort of concern is, what about my data quality? Because one thing that you can always be certain of is that when you're dealing with a very mature strategic sourcing organization and professionals in that group, they are data curious, they are skeptics, because they're constantly dealing with how to pull together information from multiple different data sources, oftentimes the enterprise. But we heard about how to pull that insight in from third-party market intelligence services as well. And it's always changing, right? The quality of the design bill of materials may be changing. The representation of what a contract manufacturer's, how in sync are they with the true cost of bill of material at that point in time? How do you pull this information together is a huge challenge. And then the underlying data quality or completeness, and then the timeliness of that data. Those different dimensions of data quality is always an issue. So one of the things early on, when we started working around the platform, is that we had to have a kind of a design philosophy that we can't expect perfect data at any level, right? We have to be able to take in partial, maybe partially incomplete, do data validation, do some scrubbing, then do augmentation, then have a review process together, and it's a continuous journey. You're never done getting better, quality of data, and then augmenting and extending that so that the LevaData canonical can be used as your reference for joining and then merging in other sources of information into one information model. So this idea of going from, okay, I've got some MPNs, manufacturing part numbers, that may be overlapping, have different code structures, and then the attributes I can't trust or haven't been updated. The source supplier is actually a distributor, not the underlying key supplier. Yada, yada, yada. Well, we take that in, but as soon as you get that MPN, and we can identify based on attribute or an exact match, we can link that to a LevaData common MPN. We can link that to any CPN, customer part number, that's unique. We can look at multiple different ERP systems that may have the same part represented in 15 different ways, but we can also link that to multiple suppliers and multiple contract manufacturers. That becomes the kind of foundation. Then we start linking that to attributes that might link it to a subcommodity or raw material, relationships, right? Where you see raw material and composition as a general pattern or a percentage based on that part category. That begins to extend out the information model. So most of our customers have this issue, and they never are done with this issue. You know what I mean, in terms of managing it. But we oftentimes, whatever data we can pull in initially, immediately lights up as long as it matches some relevant sources of information that are already on the platform. You start getting insights day one. And then the idea is to work through the gaps around, okay, we know that we've got to, harmonize or figure out how to get access to the information being held by a contract manufacturer or JDM, or we know that our design bombs are all over the place. We got to figure that out. There's always a journey for our customers in that area, but you can start leveraging these cognitive technologies immediately. And I think a lot of companies maybe are, fearful to take the big first step because they just don't feel like they're ready enough because of the data quality issues. And we think that that's a real issue, but it's not an inhibitor moving forward.
Well, and the whole idea of canonicals and ontologies is new to people. Carol, what was your experience?
Well, I can definitely echo every single thing Richard just said. Having good data is daunting. We had partial data that, particularly from the the products that were in the Bose plants originally. We had a lot of good bills of material data. We had good costing. We had a lot of good data there, and we were able to push that into the platform and get started right away. Getting to that last, 15 to 20% is really been a challenge for us. But like Richard said, it really is a journey, and you can cripple yourself and not take action if you're waiting for it to be perfect. So you can't have an expectation that right out of the gate you're gonna have a perfect situation. But again, the good quality data is what makes the engine work the best. So making sure that what you put in is as good as it can be is at least a place to get started. We started with we decided on 98% of our products from 98% of our revenue products would be put in originally, and we left the last 2% off, which is pretty impressive. And even with that 98%, there was a lot of room for improvement. There was a lot of, as Richard mentioned, adding manufacturers' part numbers, adding data tagging for raw materials. We've got lots of lists of things where we can continue to advance our maturity. But even recently, we've now just shifted to putting 100% of our products into LevaData. And that's actually helping us a lot because it is capturing a lot of those lower volume products, but maybe very critical products, and maybe some of the products where we have some of that volatility that we talked about earlier. So we're glad now that we've put them in because suddenly we're having some aha moments with that, what we might consider tail spend, not really low piece part prices, but really products that had low value. So we just never put those SKUs in. But I would say starting with something is the place to go, because if you start with something, you can start refining that. You can learn the tool. You can learn about how, you can learn where the advantages are going to be for you. And before you know it, it's going to be a pull to get the rest of the data in. But it is a challenge. It's probably been our biggest challenge, is just making sure that the data we're putting in is as good as it can be and is structured the right way. We actually, if I step back just a little bit, we actually had this thought by our executives that we were going to be able to eliminate certain positions in the company, or repurpose those resources to be doing different work, rather than doing a lot of some of the BOM maintenance that we were doing before. We said, hey, if somebody else is building it, they're the ones maintaining the BOM. They're the ones turning an engineering BOM, an e-BOM into a manufacturing BOM or a costing BOM. So we stopped. We repurposed all those resources, and we now are finding that we're taking a couple of steps back and realizing that maybe we still needed some of those resources to help us to understand exactly what the manufacturing BOM is. So we're still learning a lot. We're 18 months into our journey, but we're still learning a lot based on the manufacturing change that we had here at Bose, and how it's impacting our ability to continue doing the work that we want to do. So LevaData has actually helped us highlight a lot of those gaps that we didn't realize were gaps. But because of how we're seeing so much opportunity in areas that we can continue to peel the data back, and really learn and take advantage of these opportunities and risks, we're saying, hey, but we still need some of this information that we thought maybe we didn't need before. We need better data. We need it structured differently. And so we're learning a lot, and we're realizing, though, we can get started with certain areas right away, and then it's going to be a constant journey for us to continue to fine tune and improve and continue to just validate. So it's definitely been a journey for us, and I would say that we're making really good progress. But each time we think we're where we want to be, we take a couple of steps back, and it opens our eyes to where there's additional opportunity and additional areas where we can just continue to layer on more and more data.
Thank you, Carol. Jasmine and Richard, any last thoughts before we wrap up the webinar today?
I wouldn't mind just kind of to piggyback on what Carol had just mentioned. I think that, yeah, you absolutely cannot be afraid of having bad data. If you look at it like this, you have bad data right now, and you're in the dark now. It can only get better, right? If you start, you could, for us, using the platform, same thing, highlighted some areas where we really needed some attention. And so I really think it put us on a path to getting, better, cleaner data, and having better tools available to us. I also just wanted to say, as somebody who just loves data, not afraid of it, have a nice close personal relationship with our data. I'm the one that's usually wrangling it all together and dispersing it. And before LevaData, I was sending it out in spreadsheets. Even I was unsure, right? I'm very close to this information and uploaded it into LevaData, and even I would kind of look at it with as a skeptic, and still unsure. And I'm the one that uploaded it. I put it there. So I always thought that was kind of funny. I would think to myself. But it was just, it's in a different format. I had to get used to going after it and finding out how it was all being presented to me, and it just took time. But I definitely wouldn't be afraid of the bad data.
And
well,
Laura,
takes those scrappy teams, those subject matter experts, those data junkies, those digital natives. Richard, let's wrap. What's your thought for the group?
Well, I think a few final thoughts. One is, the reason that we really believe this is about cognitive sourcing is that it's all about human augmentation. It's about applying advanced techniques in AI, in learning, in advanced analytics, predictive analytics, but in the spirit of trying to enable and empower sourcing professionals that are incredibly lean, and provide new skills and capabilities to really scale their role and the strategic function that they're trying to provide cross-functionally within their organization. I think that we're at an early stage of adoption, but what we're seeing from our perspective is that this is happening will happen very, very quickly, and that there's going to be a significant true competitive advantage for early adopters in this area to really scale and adopt these capabilities, because the underlying innovation has just not really kept up. And if you just look at strategic sourcing and direct materials procurement, the use of Excel spreadsheets and silos of information, it's reactive mode. There's a real call to action here to really take a fresh look at that and really join kind of this early adopter, journey and learning that's happening, because we see it highly accelerated right now. So we're very excited to be helping to facilitate the work that we're doing with our customers, and we really think it's a conversation that extends way beyond just LevaData and our customers, but extends into the much broader community across all industries and thinking about direct sourcing.
Well, and Richard, I appreciate your willingness to have some of your case studies at the Supply Chain Insights Global Summit in September, where we're going to celebrate the redesign of cognitive computing decision support. And as we think about, the evolution, now's the time to embrace these new technologies. We evolved decision support really for functional silos, and we need to be really embracing outside-in supplier capabilities, contract manufacturers. It is a network. It's something beyond traditional types of decision support, and we've got to build with the goal in mind. So I say to companies, start with a problem, whether it's price masking and contract manufacturing, or it's volatility of a certain commodity, or perhaps it's bringing in disparate data and you want to learn on the patterns. Start with the goal in mind and really learn, because the supply chain is a complex system. 90% of companies are stuck. They're not making improvement in margin and inventory, and the reason is we're focused on volume, not on value. And I think LevaData bringing cognitive computing to sourcing is a great opportunity. So my action item for the group is, I think it's time to take a different path, to really embrace cognitive computing and to rethink the current state and to do things differently. Thank you, Carol, Jasmine, and Richard. We will be making this available for replay and encourage people to come and join us for the Supply Chain Revolution that will be happening in September, where we'll be featuring cognitive computing case studies, and LevaData will be there. Thank you very much. Richard?
Thank you. Appreciate it.